In the world of high-stakes engineering, some stories become legends. This is one of them. The tension on the tarmac was so thick you could feel it, a kind of cold that had nothing to do with the biting November wind. A multi-million-dollar prototype jet, the Odyssey, sat lifeless, a sleek, gray monument to the failure of a dozen elite engineers. For weeks, they'd thrown every high-tech diagnostic tool, every complex algorithm, and every ounce of their pedigreed knowledge at the problem. All they got back was a defeating, expensive silence. The aircraft was supposed to be the crowning achievement of Carter Aerospace, the key to its future. Instead, it had become a source of deep corporate shame. Scornful and defeated, the engineers huddled in their insulated jackets, their tablets displaying endless streams of useless data. They barely noticed the quiet mechanic in the corner, the one they called the old-timer, as he methodically organized his tools. But when the lead engineer, a man named Dr. Alistair Finch, sarcastically muttered just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well, we're out of ideas. Maybe you want to give it a shot, grease monkey?" He had no idea he was about to be completely and utterly humiliated, because with nothing but his hands and a lifetime of wisdom, that old mechanic was about to show them all up. The Odyssey wasn't just another private jet, it was a statement. Designed by the visionary, if unproven, CEO of Carter Aerospace, Alexandra Carter, it was meant to revolutionize private aviation. Its wings had an aggressive, raptor-like curve, promising unmatched fuel efficiency. Its body was built from a next-gen composite material, making it lighter and stronger than anything else on the market. On paper, it was a masterpiece. In reality, it was a nine-figure paperweight grounded on the company's own turf. For 3 agonizing weeks, the Odyssey had refused to start. Not with a sputter, not with a cough, but with an unnerving perfect silence. The twin engines, each worth more than a suburban neighborhood, would begin their spool-up sequence, their turbines whining to a peak, only to cut out at the precise moment of ignition. No bang, no error code. Not a single warning light on the multi-million-dollar cockpit display. The system just aborted like it had lost its nerve. From her office window overlooking the tarmac, Alexandra Carter had watched this scene play out dozens of times. At just 32, she had gambled her family's company and her entire reputation on this plane. The fleet order that was supposed to launch the Odyssey into production, a deal that would secure Carter Aerospace for a decade, was hanging by a thread. The buyers were getting impatient. The board was getting nervous, and every silent, failed ignition was another nail in her professional coffin. Down below, her hand-picked team of experts had devolved into a circular firing squad of blame. Dr. Finch, a man with degrees from two of the world's most prestigious universities, was the picture of frustrated arrogance. He and his team, all polished prodigies in their late 20s and early 30s, had done everything by the book. They'd run terabytes of diagnostic simulations. They'd swapped out the full authority digital engine control units, not once, but 3 times. They replaced the fuel pumps, the ignition exciters, and nearly every sensor on the aircraft. They even had the engine's manufacturer fly in their top troubleshooters, who left just as baffled as Finch's team. Their conclusion was as defensive as it was damning. The problem wasn't their work, but the jet's fundamental design, a subtle way of shifting the blame back to Alexandra. They used a language of fluid dynamics and resonant frequencies, suggesting some unforeseen harmonic vibration was messing with the fuel flow at the exact point of combustion. It was a theory so complex it was almost impossible to disprove, the perfect shield for their own incompetence. They stood around the silent machine, not as problem solvers, but as well-dressed coroners at an autopsy. The man they called Grease Monkey had a name: Eli Mercer. At 58, his face was a roadmap of long days and longer nights, with lines etched around his eyes from decades of squinting into complex machines. He was the facility's senior tarmac mechanic, a title that, to these hotshot engineers, was basically one step up from janitor. They saw his grease-stained overalls and calloused hands and wrote him off as a relic from a bygone era of analog gauges and brute force. They were dead wrong. Eli lived in a different world. Not a world of data streams and simulations, but one of tactile feedback and sensory truth. His world smelled of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid. It was a world where you could judge the health of a billion-dollar machine by the pitch of a hydraulic pump, or a subtle vibration felt through the sole of your boot. What the young engineers didn't know, and never bothered to ask, was that 30 years ago, Eli Mercer was a lead maintenance chief in the Air Force. He kept some of the world's most advanced and temperamental military aircraft flying in the harshest conditions imaginable, long before diagnostic tablets were even a thing. He didn't leave that world because he failed. He left because he was fed up with the bureaucracy and the growing disconnect between the designers and the machines they design. He just wanted a quieter life, close to the engines, close to the metal and wires that he understood better than most people. For 3 weeks, Eli had watched the circus from a respectful distance. He'd see the team of experts arrive each morning, their confident strides getting a little shorter each day. He saw them hook up their laptops and stare at screens, their faces lit up by graphs and charts that told them nothing. He watched them argue over theories while the magnificent machine sat cold and inert. He'd shake his head, not with contempt, but with a quiet sadness. They were trying to command the machine, to force it to obey their code. They'd forgotten the first step is always to listen. Eli believed every machine had a language. The problem was, fewer and fewer people knew how to speak it. He never offered his opinion. He knew it wouldn't be welcome. In the new hierarchy of the aerospace world, a mechanic's intuition was considered little more than folklore. So he kept to himself, doing his duties, making sure the support vehicles were ready, and the tarmac was clear. But all the while, he was watching, observing, and listening. All right, before we get to the good part, if you're enjoying this story of the unsung hero, do me a favor and hit that like button. It tells YouTube you want to see more content like this. And for fun, drop a comment to let us know where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Now back to the tarmac. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. The wind howled across the airfield, carrying the first hint of a winter storm. Alexandra Carter, her face pale and drawn, had finally had enough. She strode out of the main building and marched directly to Dr. Finch. "Alistair," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "The backers are calling an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. They're threatening to pull the plug. I need an answer, and I need it now, not a theory. An answer." Dr. Finch, caught off guard, visibly flinched. He straightened his designer jacket and fell back on his rehearsed defense. "Alexandra, like I've been telling you, the data points to a cascading resonance failure. It's a core design issue. Perhaps if my team had been consulted earlier." He was cut short. "So you're telling me that this entire project, my company's flagship, is a complete write-off?" Alexandra's voice cracked with fury and despair. "That's your final answer? We should just scrap it?" Finch was cornered, his pride on the line in front of his whole team. He needed a deflection. His eyes scanned the tarmac and landed on Eli Mercer, who was quietly securing a nearby fuel cart. A cruel, condescending smirk spread across Finch's face. "Unless you think he has a magic wrench we don't know about," Finch said, gesturing dismissively towards Eli. And then he said the words that sealed his fate. "We're out of ideas. Maybe you want to give it a shot, grease monkey?" A few of the younger engineers chuckled nervously. For them, it was just a joke to release the pressure by mocking the lowest status person in sight. But the insult hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Eli stopped what he was doing. He slowly turned, his expression impossible to read. He didn't look angry. He just looked at Finch with a steady gaze that seemed to see right through the man's expensive suit and brittle ego. In that charged silence, Alexandra looked from Finch's smug face to Eli's quiet dignity. She had seen Eli, around for years, a constant, silent presence she'd never truly noticed. But now in his calm demeanor, she saw something completely missing from her experts. Confidence. Not the loud, boastful kind, but a deep, unshakable self-assurance that comes from real knowledge. She was desperate, she was out of options, and she was sick of the arrogance that led her here. "Fine," she snapped, the decision made in an instant. The engineers' laughter died in their throats. "Let him try." Finch's smirk vanished. "Alexandra, be serious. This is a complex piece of aerospace technology, not a lawnmower. What is he gonna do? What more have we got to lose?" she shot back, her eyes fixed on Eli. She walked towards him. "Mr. Mercer, my lead engineer has volunteered you. Would you be willing to take a look?" Eli looked past her, at the magnificent silent jet. He held her gaze for a long moment, then gave a single curt nod. He didn't smile. He didn't say a word about the insult. His simple acceptance was more powerful than any comeback. He turned to the stunned group of engineers. "I need two things," he said, his voice raspy but clear. "Absolute silence, and for all of you to step back, at least 100 feet." A circle of silence formed around the Odyssey. The experts, now looking like confused spectators at a game they didn't understand, retreated as instructed, their expressions a mix of mockery and disbelief. Dr. Finch stood at the front of the group, a thunderous look on his face, waiting for the charade to end. Alexandra Carter stood alone, closer than the rest, her heart pounding. Eli didn't walk to the cockpit or ask for a tablet. Instead, he went to his own worn red toolbox and pulled out a few simple items: a set of wrenches, a flashlight, and a cheap mechanic's stethoscope with a long metal probe at the end. First, he just observed. He began a slow walk around the entire aircraft, running his bare, calloused hand along the cold skin of the fuselage, over the engine. He closed his eyes as if trying to feel a tremor, a subtle wrongness in the metal itself. The young engineers shot each other smirking, disbelieving glances. Next, he had the ground crew switch on the jet's auxiliary power. A low hum filled the air. Finch's team had analyzed this hum for weeks. Eli ignored all that. He just closed his eyes again, his head tilted, and listened. To the others, it was white noise. To Eli, it was a symphony, and he was listening for the one instrument that was out of tune. After a few minutes, he moved to a service panel near the landing gear, opening a bay filled with a dense network of hydraulic lines. He didn't connect a gauge. He placed his bare palm flat against one of the main lines, then another. Then he took out his stethoscope. One of the engineers let out a stifled laugh. "Is he going to check its heartbeat?" he whispered. Eli placed the metal probe against a junction block, his eyes closed, listening to the fluid moving through the lines. He moved slowly, methodically, from one component to the next, tracing a sound no one else could hear, a sound so faint it was buried beneath the hum of the pumps. Then he stopped. He'd found it, a tiny, high-pitched whine. It wasn't a rattle or a clank. It was an almost imperceptible hiss. He traced it not to a pump or a servo or any of the $1,000 components the experts had replaced. He traced it to a small, insignificant-looking pressure return valve, no bigger than his thumb, a simple part the diagnostics had marked as nominal on every test. He pulled out his flashlight, aiming the beam at the valve. To the naked eye, it looked fine, but Eli knew better. "Get me a dye-penetrant kit," he called to a junior crew member. "The red stuff." Minutes later, he cleaned the valve, sprayed it with a bright red dye, wiped it clean, and then sprayed a white developer over it. For a moment, nothing. Finch started to smirk again. But then, under Eli's flashlight, a faint, jagged red line began to bleed through the white. A hairline fracture, almost invisible, spider-webbing across the valve's housing. A collective gasp went through the onlookers. Eli finally turned to face the stunned group. "There's your ghost," he said, pointing the flashlight at the incriminating red line. "This crack? It's too small to leak fluid. It won't cause a big pressure drop that your fancy sensors would ever pick up. But under the high pressure of the spool-up, it was letting microscopic air bubbles into the hydraulic fluid. Those bubbles traveled up to the fuel control unit. A pocket of them would pass through and cause a tiny hydraulic hiccup. It was just enough to trick the fuel controller into thinking it was being starved of fuel. So it did its job. It aborted the ignition to protect the engine. Your computers were chasing a phantom electrical error. The problem was never electrical, it was physical. The silence on the tarmac was now absolute. Eli, without another word, took a small wrench and removed the faulty valve. It was a $10 part. He walked over to a maintenance locker, pulled a new one from a plastic bag, and just as calmly installed it. The whole thing took less than 15 minutes. He stepped back, closed the panel, and wiped his hands on a rag. He looked up at the cockpit where the pilots had been watching. He gave them a simple, authoritative nod. "Try her now." A moment later, the familiar whine of the engine's spool-up began, climbing in pitch, reaching the exact point where it had failed every single time. The engineers held their breath. Dr. Finch's face was ashen. And then, a deep, resonant whoosh followed by a deafening, perfect roar. The engine ignited, not with a struggle, but with a clean, powerful burst of life. The sound was smooth, stable, and ferocious. It was the sound of success. The experts just stood there frozen, jaws slack, eyes wide with a mix of awe and pure, soul-crushing humiliation. Weeks of their lives, millions of dollars, their entire professional reputation, all undone in under an hour by a man with a stethoscope. All their theories, their data models, their condescending certainty, evaporated in the fiery exhaust of the now perfectly running engine. Dr. Finch looked like he'd been physically struck. Eli didn't gloat. He didn't even look at the engineers. As the engine's roar settled into a confident idle, he simply began packing his tools, his job done. That sound was the only validation he needed. As he was about to walk away, Alexandra Carter approached him, the stress gone from her face, replaced by profound respect. "How?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper against the engine's power. "After all of this, all of them, how did you know?" Eli paused and looked from the roaring engine back to the defeated experts who were now trying to look anywhere but at him. He turned back to Alexandra, and for the first time, a faint, knowing glint appeared in his eyes. He delivered the simple truth. "Ma'am," he said, his voice even and steady, "they listen to their computers. The computers listen to the code they're given. I listen to the machine. It always tells you the truth, if you just learn how to speak its language." With a final respectful nod, Eli Mercer turned and walked away, his silhouette framed by the powerful glow of the engine he had brought to life. He didn't ask for a bonus or a promotion. His quiet, dignified retreat was his victory lap. He left a team of humiliated experts in the shadow of the now perfect machine, and a young CEO with a lesson she would never forget. True genius isn't always found in degrees and data. Sometimes it's found in the calloused hands and the listening ear of a master. On that day, Eli Mercer became more than a mechanic. He became a legend on the tarmac.